Did the CMP examiner call you fat? Sorry. I'm Dr. Todd Finnerty. I'm a psychologist. I work on Nexus letters and DBQs, psychological exams for veterans disability cases. And I've, seen a lot of cases that involve obesity. And obesity can be a funny thing on a VA disability case, right? For some people, it can literally be the reason that they were denied. And then on a nearly identical claim, the obesity can be the reason they were approved. So it is, you can't make this stuff up sometimes when it comes to VA disability. Now, of course, obesity isn't going to be service connected itself per se. And again, I mentioned I'm a psychologist. I'm not an accredited rep. I'm not an attorney. Take any policy issues with a grain of salt. I don't represent the VA. But obesity can be like a pathway, intermediary. So to go from one thing, like in my area of expertise, like a psychological condition, to go from a psychological condition to some other physical condition, for example, like, so your PTSD, depression, anxiety can lead to obesity, which leads to something else like hypertension, sleep apnea, GERD, diabetes. There's a whole list of things that can be caused by or aggravated by, made worse by obesity, of course, right? Weight gain. So it's kind of funny because I'll see a lot of cases where a CMP examiner will blame those conditions, like and these are in secondary cases generally, where somebody's filing for sleep apnea secondary to PTSD, for example, or depression or anything else. And the CMP examiner will say something like, your obesity was caused by lifestyle choices or an excessive caloric intake, right? So you've made these choices and it's your fault that you put on weight. It's your fault you're obese. And interestingly enough, those are behaviors they're talking about, right? I'm a psychologist. A lot of times we call psychology the study of behavior, study of human behavior, right? You've heard of mental health. Sometimes we refer to it as behavioral health, right? We're talking about behaviors. So, it's fair to say psychologists are experts in behaviors like food choices, right? Eating behaviors, activity levels, exercise, those things that are involved in, lifestyle choices and excessive caloric intake. And it's funny because those same phrases are used repeatedly by a lot of different examiners. So you wonder, are they copying each other, or is there some training that they're all stealing it from? I don't know, but it's interesting that the same phrases get recycled over and over. I don't know. I guess I should go back and look and see if it's up to date. But sorry. I'm not going to edit any of this. but so psychological disorders can, by definition, impact things like eating behaviors. And they can impact activity levels, right? Let's take the example. It's like cliche, but the example of someone with a really bad depression, right, where they don't want to get out of bed. They're in bed all day, so obviously they're not exercising, right? Maybe, and with depression there could be one or two. There could be a low appetite, or there could be emotional eating or binge eating, like just making poor food choices, like, hey, there's a bag of chips. I don't have the energy to do anything, but I'm going to like self-soothe perhaps even more just by eating this whole bag of chips, right? So, and there's a lot of research. I'll put a link in maybe, there's maybe I'll add something to my website with even more, but in terms of language for a lot of scientific evidence, a lot of, but even like the very definition of things like major depressive disorder, show things like changes in weight, changes in activity levels, things like that. So it's quite obvious that it's not just a lifestyle choice, even when it comes to mental health issues. So, but amusingly, even more, I don't know why I find it too funny, but I've seen a lot of CMP exams at this point, and of course, a lot of times it's maybe a contractor without a lot of time, and they just sort of copy and paste the same language over and over again, and they'll use a laundry list of risk factors, with obesity being the number one most important risk factor, which, by the way, is not causative evidence, whatever the word causative really, or associative. I don't know that we necessarily have that standardized, but the number one risk factor is not necessarily causative evidence. But we'll go back. We'll get on track. I'm sorry, but they'll say the obesity is the number one risk factor, and then therefore it's less likely than not that your sleep apnea was caused by PTSD or hypertension, whatever we're happening to be talking about in terms of obesity as an intermediary. And then you go and actually look at the evidence, and the person has a normal BMI. They don't even. It happens so often, this copy and pasted language, and they'll say, "Oh, it's because of obesity," and then the person actually isn't obese. And I was like, okay, good job, CMP examiner. Way to relate it to the medical evidence. You sure did perform a thorough review, and that's the rating decision gave you weight because of that thorough review you did, but you did not. Sorry, I'm having too much fun today. I don't know. I gotta make this short. But so but the same thing is true with like something like I've there's cases where it's like an old age and the person's like 29 or they're a smoker, another person's never smoked, so it's these things don't get integrated into the medical evidence like they should. But I will put more resources. The sleep apnea one definitely already has like a bunch of stuff related to obesity, and that can apply. So I'll save myself a little time. If you go to nexusletters.com and look in the sleep apnea side, there's a bunch of research related to binge eating, language related to the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder, even PTSD as well, that clearly demonstrates that psychological conditions can in fact impact eating behaviors and activity levels, and it isn't necessarily just a lifestyle choice or excessive caloric intake. There's more to it than that, and certainly not an accredited rep, not an attorney, but it makes sense to pay attention to not just the PTSD, depression, anxiety itself, but also the impact on things like weight gain, obesity, because the examiners are going to address it, so it makes sense for you to look at that too, even though sometimes that's not even the most important factor, to be honest with you. But again, Todd Finnerty, psychologist, nexusletters.com. Thanks again. Like, share, subscribe.